Livye Lewis and Zach Parker looked like the perfect young couple. She was bright, kind, and full of promise. He was charming, protective, and devoted. But behind their smiles hid a love poisoned by jealousy, obsession, and control. One night at a college party, what began as harmless tension spiraled into rage, and by morning, only one of them would still be alive. This is the chilling story of how a party, jealousy, and a rifle ended a life and shattered a quiet town forever. The evening air in Benton Falls carried the faint chill of autumn, mingling with the distant sounds of laughter and music drifting from a small farmhouse on the edge of town. Inside, strings of lights glowed warmly against the wooden walls, reflecting off red plastic cups and smiling faces. It was meant to be a simple celebration, a birthday gathering for one of the students at the local university. But as the night wore on, the energy began to shift in subtle ways that no one noticed until it was too late. Among the guests was Livye Lewis, a 22-year-old nursing student known for her kindness and steady optimism. She had a way of making people feel seen, her laughter light and genuine, her presence comforting even in a crowd. She had come with her boyfriend, Zach Parker, a former athlete studying business. At first, they seemed like any other young couple, smiling for photos, sharing drinks, and chatting with friends. But beneath Zach's polite grin was a growing restlessness. He noticed how easily people gravitated toward Livye, how she spoke to everyone with the same warmth she gave him. The arrival of Hannah Reed, one of Livye's classmates and Zach's ex-girlfriend, only deepened his unease. Their history was brief but messy, the kind of thing best left in the past. Yet when he saw Hannah and Livye talking together near the porch, laughing over something harmless, a flicker of anger stirred inside him. As the night darkened, small moments began to build. Livye dancing with friends, Zach watching silently from a corner, his expression tightening with every passing minute. The laughter around him no longer felt light. The party, meant to bring people together, had unknowingly become the stage for something far more sinister. A slow, invisible unraveling that would end before the sun rose again. Livye's kindness had always been her strength, but that night it became the spark that fueled Zach's jealousy. She had a natural charm that drew people in, a calm, genuine way of connecting with others that made her well-liked in every circle she entered. At the party, she moved easily between groups, laughing, talking, and taking photos with friends she hadn't seen in weeks. To her, it was just another fun night. To Zach, it looked like betrayal unfolding right before his eyes. Every smile she gave, every friendly touch on someone's arm, every shared joke seemed to Zach like a challenge to his place in her life. He watched her talk to a group of guys from her nursing program and felt his pulse quicken. He told himself he was overreacting, but the feeling wouldn't fade. When Livye later joined Hannah near the kitchen, complimenting her outfit and laughing about old stories from class, something in Zach snapped. The sight of his girlfriend talking so freely with someone he once dated twisted his thoughts into dark knots of suspicion. Friends noticed the shift. Zach, once loud and social, had grown quiet and distant, his eyes following Livye's every move. When she tried to hand him a drink, he brushed it off, pretending to be fine, though his clenched jaw said otherwise. Livye sensed something was off, but assumed it was just another one of Zach's moods, something she'd grown used to managing. What she didn't see was how deep his resentment had already sunk. By midnight, the party lights flickered against Zach's tense face. He stood near the door, watching Livye laugh across the room, feeling as if the world had turned against him. In his mind, her warmth was no longer innocence. It was rejection, and it burned. The party ended in the early hours of the morning, with the last of the guests drifting out into the cool night air. The once lively music had faded to silence, leaving behind only the faint hum of crickets and the soft rustle of wind through the trees. Livye gathered her things, ready to leave. She noticed Zach waiting near the car, his posture rigid, his expression unreadable. The earlier tension still lingered between them like smoke that refused to clear. They drove off down the narrow country road, the car's headlights cutting through the darkness. Neither of them spoke for a while. The quiet was heavy, broken only by the sound of tires crunching over gravel. Livy could feel Zach's mood even without looking at him. His silence wasn't the calm kind. It was the dangerous, building kind that made her stomach tighten. She tried to ease it by asking if he was okay, but he only muttered a short answer and stared out the window. The glow of streetlights occasionally illuminated his face, revealing a mix of anger and hurt that frightened her more than she wanted to admit. When they reached a stretch of empty road leading back into town, Zach began to talk, his voice sharp and uneven. He accused her of humiliating him, of disrespecting their relationship, of still caring about people from her past more than him. Livy tried to explain that she had done nothing wrong, that she had simply been friendly, but her calm words only made him angrier. By the time they reached his apartment, the atmosphere inside the car felt suffocating. Livy decided it was best to drop him off and leave before things got worse. As he stepped out, she didn't notice the look he gave her, a look filled with quiet rage, the kind that doesn't fade with sleep. Morning sunlight spilled over the quiet streets of Benton Falls, casting long shadows across the rows of small houses. It was a peaceful Sunday, the kind of morning when nothing ever seemed out of place. But by 10 a.m., concern was already growing. Livy's roommate, Emma, noticed her absence. Livy's bed was still made, her phone charger untouched, and the uniform she was supposed to wear for her hospital shift hung neatly in her closet. It wasn't like her to disappear without a word. She was always punctual, always dependable. When calls to her phone went straight to voicemail, Emma's worry deepened. At first, friends assumed she might have stayed over at Zach's place after the party. But when no one had heard from either of them by midday, unease began to spread. Social media messages went unanswered, and group chats filled with questions that no one could answer. Meanwhile, Zach's neighbors had their own suspicions. Around 3 a.m., several had been woken by the sound of raised voices and a door slamming. One neighbor mentioned hearing something heavy being dragged across the floor, followed by the faint, metallic echo of something dropping. By early afternoon, police officers were sent to Zach's apartment for a welfare check. The door was unlocked. Inside, the air was thick and stale. The living room was in disarray. An overturned chair, shattered glass near the kitchen counter, and streaks of what appeared to be blood leading toward the entryway. Livy's handbag sat on the couch, her car keys still inside. But neither she nor Zach were there. When officers stepped outside, they noticed Zach's car parked crookedly in the driveway, mud caked along its tires. Whatever had happened in that apartment wasn't an argument that got out of hand. It was something far darker, something irreversible. By the next morning, Benton Falls was no longer its quiet, sleepy self. News of Livy's disappearance spread quickly, turning the small town into a hive of worry and speculation. Posters with her photo were printed and shared across social media. Friends, classmates, and even strangers gathered to search the outskirts of town, calling her name through fields and wooded trails. Every hour that passed without a sign of her made hope feel thinner. Detectives working the case quickly turned their attention to Zach Parker. He hadn't reported Livy missing, and his phone had been switched off since the previous night. When officers finally tracked him down, he appeared exhausted, his clothes rumpled, his eyes hollow. He claimed they had argued, that Livy stormed out after dropping him off. But his story didn't match what neighbors had heard, nor did it explain the blood found in his apartment or the muddy tires on his car. A search warrant was issued, and forensic teams combed through his property. They found an empty rifle case in the closet and traces of blood in the trunk of his car. Surveillance footage from a gas station just outside town showed Zach's vehicle stopping briefly at 3:27 a.m. He was seen buying gloves, a shovel, and a pack of cigarettes. The clerk later recalled that he looked pale, trembling, and spoke very little. Following this lead, investigators searched the wooded area near the gas station. Volunteers joined officers as they fanned out across the dense forest. Hours turned into days, and just when it seemed they might find nothing, a search dog alerted its handler to a disturbed patch of soil beneath a cluster of pines. There, beneath a thin layer of earth and fallen leaves, they uncovered what everyone had feared from the start: Livy's body. Zach Parker was brought into custody 2 days after the discovery. At first, he maintained a calm, detached demeanor, answering questions with rehearsed precision. He told detectives he had nothing to do with Livye's death, that she left him after their argument and never came back. But the evidence told a different story. His fingerprints were found on the shovel recovered near the burial site, and traces of Livye's blood were discovered in the trunk of his car. When confronted with these findings, his composure began to crack. The confident tone vanished, replaced by stammered explanations that shifted with every question. Detectives pressed harder, showing him the timeline reconstructed from security footage and phone records. He had been seen driving toward the remote trail shortly after 3 a.m. and returning home just before sunrise. Each new piece of evidence chipped away at his denial until his silence became impossible to maintain. After hours of interrogation, Zach finally broke. His shoulders slumped, his eyes filled with tears, and the words came out in fragments. He admitted that after Livye left the party, he couldn't calm himself down. He called her repeatedly, demanding to talk. When she eventually agreed to meet him near the outskirts of town, their argument reignited. She told him she was tired of his jealousy, his possessiveness, his need to control everything. Those words struck him harder than any insult could. In a blind rush of anger, he retrieved his rifle from the back seat, claiming he just wanted to scare her. But as emotions consumed him, his finger tightened on the trigger. The gunshot echoed into the night, and in the heavy silence that followed, he realized what he had done. Panic took over. He hid her body, buried her beneath the trees, and returned home as if nothing had happened. The days following Zach Parker's confession sent shockwaves through Bend Falls. News outlets swarmed the small town, their headlines filled with words like jealousy, rage, and betrayal. People who had once known Zach as the quiet college athlete struggled to reconcile that image with a man accused of murder. For Livye's family, the grief was immeasurable. They had come to town hoping for her safe return, only to be met with the unbearable truth that she had been buried alone in the woods by someone she trusted most. The community responded with heartbreak and outrage. Vigils were held in the town square, where candles flickered against photos of Livye's smiling face. Friends shared memories of her laughter, her patience, and her dream of becoming a pediatric nurse. Her classmates wore blue ribbons in her honor, while the hospital where she had trained placed flowers in the lobby in her memory. The tragedy had touched everyone, leaving behind a wound that would not easily heal. When Zach's trial began, the courthouse overflowed with people desperate to hear how love could turn so violent. The prosecution described a man consumed by jealousy and control, painting a picture of a relationship that had slowly suffocated under suspicion. The defense argued that Zach's actions were driven by emotional instability, that he hadn't intended to kill her, but his confession and the forensic evidence spoke louder than any excuses. Throughout the proceedings, Zach sat motionless, eyes fixed on the floor, as Livye's family wept quietly in the front row. After 2 tense weeks, the jury returned with a unanimous verdict, guilty of first-degree murder. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without parole. The courtroom fell silent except for the sound of Livye's mother whispering her daughter's name, a reminder of the life stolen by uncontrollable rage. Months after the trial ended, Benton Falls tried to return to normal, but the memory of what happened to Livye Lewis lingered everywhere. Her name became a quiet symbol of both sorrow and strength. The college where she had studied created a memorial garden in her honor, a small, peaceful space filled with lavender and white roses, her favorite flowers. Students often stopped there between classes, some to pray, others to reflect on how fragile life could be. Livye's parents, still grieving but determined to keep her memory alive, started the Livye Lewis Project, a foundation dedicated to raising awareness about the dangers of possessive relationships and emotional abuse. Their message was clear: love should never feel like fear. Each year on the anniversary of her death, the community gathered to remember her. Friends spoke about her kindness, her laughter, and the future she never got to have. The event always ended the same way, With a candlelight walk through the streets, hundreds of tiny flames moving together in the dark, illuminating the town that would never forget her. In prison, Zach Parker's name faded from conversation. He became a reminder of how quickly jealousy can turn into violence when left unchecked. Psychologists later used his case to teach about warning signs in controlling relationships, showing how emotional instability and possessiveness can grow into something deadly. Livye's story reached beyond Ben Falls. News reports and documentaries spread her case across the country, turning her tragedy into a lesson for others. Her family took small comfort in knowing her story might save someone else from a similar fate. Though her life was cut short, her memory continued to shine, a quiet voice reminding others that true love cannot exist where control and fear take root.